join us again for this program. It's been running for quite a couple of weeks now, and the feedback that we've been hearing is that people are enjoying the programs, but more so they are actually being blessed, and it's helping their marriages. And today it's another program that is exciting, and that will help also with your marriages, and it certainly will be something that will help mine as well. Today we're going to be talking about kids, and it's I'm excited. I've got some myself, and the people that are going to be presenting, Rhea and Tamara, have been very helpful in my own journey with my kids, and I know that you're going to be blessed by the message that they're going to give today. So before we give over to Rhea and Tamara, I would just like us to pray. Let's pray. Father God in heaven, we just want to thank you for this opportunity that you've given us to be able to come together to learn more about kids. And I just pray that you'll be with Rhea and Tamara as they're going to share. Please help them be a blessing. Help them to be your mouthpiece. I pray and thank you. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Give it over to Rhea and Tamara.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Well, if you go ahead maybe and share the slides. We have a few slides to share with you. Great. Hopefully everything is working okay. So we'll start with a bit of an introduction, just tell you a bit more about who we are, and just a few things about us, particularly for those who haven't met us before. So as has been said, we are Rhea and Tamara, and we've been married about 6 years now.
A little over 6 years, yeah.
Yeah, and we are privileged to have a son, 3-year-old son, called Ethan, and so that completes our family.
Yeah. So before we thought about what we wanted to say, or as we were thinking about what we were going to share today, it's a big topic, but I actually asked my sister, what kind of things would you ask? And one of the things she said was a bit more about your journey. So just in very brief, as we said, we've been married a little over 6 years now. And interestingly, obviously when we first started seeing each other, a bit before that, one of the things that comes up if you're thinking this is a potential life partner is, what about children? Mm-hmm. And I actually shared that I wasn't entirely sure whether or not I wanted to have children. And Rhea definitely knew he did want children. And so when you've got one not sure maybe and one yes, that definitely tips it in favor of the yes. We had kind of said around 2 years we'd like to have together on our own to, really share married life at the beginning, before any children came along. So I wouldn't say we were exactly trying for a baby when we got pregnant with Ethan, but we knew we were reaching 2 years, and that was about the time where we would were saying that we might think about children coming along. So Ethan came along, and as we said, has been here 3 years, and we're going to share a bit about our experiences along the way. And Rhea's really going to take the first part and talk about some of the things from his perspective that he thought were interesting, and then he'll switch over to me and I'll share some things that might be possibly more specific to the female perspective, but it's not necessarily exactly a male-female divide, but we hope it's useful.
Yeah, certainly I find it's quite useful hearing both sides, and hopefully that will come out well. And so, what will we cover? Well, certainly the first part, just some key sort of overall key points. We'll certainly talk about personal preparation for yourself before you have the baby. We'll talk about some practical things that you need to consider. There's also some financial implications about having children. Then a lot of people ask, when is the best time to have a baby, or is there a best time to have a baby? We'll certainly explore that. But like I said, like Tamara said, we've tried to let you hear from a male perspective, and then from Tamara's point of view. So some of what I've covered here is largely what I'm covering on, and then Tamara will come in as well and cover from her side. So if I was to summarize with a scripture, some of the key things that I want to share from our experience so far, I'll probably turn to the book of Luke, chapter 14, verse 28 to 29. And the Bible shares a principle here. I want you to take the principle rather than the context where this was said. So it says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the costs, yes, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him." The principle I get from the Bible is this: with most things that you will embark on in your life, it's good to plan. Think about, okay, how am I going to realize this? So here we're talking about children today. I think personally it's a bad idea to just suddenly have one and you've not taught whether. Exactly. Okay, and the baby's like, I'm here now. And so communication is often something that's mentioned time and time again in relationships. And I often find that's quite key when you as a couple actually talk about, okay, do we both want to have a baby, for starters? For some, they might find a child is not for them, and that's perfectly acceptable too. It's not like every couple is going to have a child. But also you then begin to think about, what things will I need? Am I able to get those things? Because I believe that line that says, some people will mock, yes, unfortunately it's true that sometimes some family setups, it becomes a mockery because the child just arrived, the parents are not prepared, and the way the whole life unveils is not done for the glory of God, or it's not right for the child, it's not right for the parents either. So hopefully some of what we're sharing today is just some key principles on how best to prepare for the arrival of your baby. The first thing then that I want to share with you is, it's certainly from my experience, it's helpful to personally prepare for this. I was about to say for this day, but I was about to say babies are not just for Christmas. It's not a one-time experience. It's obviously going to be a lifetime of having somebody else in your life. And there's a lot of challenging moments that come. And I think emotionally, you do want to have prepared yourself for that experience when it comes. I find it's better for somebody to tell me, okay, this is what's to come ahead. It might be that, okay, clearly there'll be some glorious moments of having children, but there'll equally be some challenging times. And I think it's just wise to foresee some of what might be challenging and prepare yourself for it, so that when the time comes, it just doesn't knock you out. If somebody says children are just la 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 la, like, you know, when our churches are open, we hold babies on Sabbath, and you just enjoy.
Are, but not your own.
So it's certainly helpful knowing that in as much as they're lovely, they do have their own demands and their own challenges. And it will be helpful thinking about what are some of those difficult moments going to be. And so some of the things that are out there that are available, even from a personal preparation, the options, there's something called Antenatal Classes. There's mixed reactions about them. Some people find it very useful. Some people just say, we went, but didn't really help much. But what those classes do is they talk you through the entire process from start to finish, especially if it's your first one. For us, for me, let me say, never had a baby before, so you don't know what to expect. And it's nice to have somebody just talk you through all the key moments, key stages, what do you need to think about. And that certainly I found helpful.
And the one thing I'd say about antenatal classes as well is don't necessarily rely on one source of information of where you can even find them if you decide that you would like to explore them. I know I just asked my midwife and she just directed me to the maternity wards classes, and it was only after I'd registered and we started going to them that we found out there's other options out there for classes where you might, you know, the ones for the maternity ward, there's people from all over the city. You're not necessarily near any of those that you'll make friendships and that kind of thing. So depending whether you want the information, whether you want to just make connections with people at the same stage as you and find some friends nearby, look around if you decide to look into it and see what's available.
So just closing this section, going back to the whole communication, you can only prepare for this if you've actually spoke about, okay, we are going to try for a baby, this is what we want. If you suddenly just end up with a baby accidentally, you've not had time to prepare. And this is why some people really do, I mean, the whole post, what do they call it, T? Yes, thank you. It affects a lot of people. It's genuine, it's hard because now suddenly a lot of emotion, a lot of changes are happening in your life and you just hadn't prepared for it. And I think this is one of the helping aids towards it. Money, it's a key topic. So what are the financial implications? They say a lot of marriage divorces that they look at, sometimes the link finance is a big part of it. And I think it's worthwhile touching on finance when you're thinking about having a baby, because definitely it can have the potential to increase your budget, your household expenses, depending on how you approach it. Some people have done it so well that you hardly notice a difference, but perhaps it's not everybody who's able to do that. Certainly when it's the first one, I find there's an element of, this is my son, he's going to get the best that's out there, the best clothes, the best everything. And you find that the cost goes up because you're buying at the time quite a lot of new things, and they're actually growing rapidly, so they're not actually keeping everything for ages when it's clothes and shoes.
And be aware there is a whole industry out there that takes advantage of that very feeling of people want the best for a baby. A baby brings out the desire to bar all the stops, just go all out there and get everything. And the industry is also aware that first-time parents don't necessarily know what they need, because in many situations you've not had any experience with this before. So if the shops tell me I need this and this is there, then I must need it. So it's a chance to really think about it.
Yeah, so on this, I would say, once you've considered that, yes, we are thinking about having a baby, then you might want to, within your household budget, start to see, have we got leeway for it? Because again, it would be sad. If you're already somehow stretched because of your lifestyle, you don't have any gaps, then you suddenly bring a baby, there's not much that leeway for you to be able to support that baby, then it can be also unfair on the baby themselves. But some of what I'll share, which no doubt you might hear again from Tamara, is that there's actually smart ways of minimizing your costs when you have a baby. So think about what other things you definitely want brand new for your baby, but perhaps not everything needs to be brand new. We were quite fortunate that some of the things, like just the practical chairs, for example, for babies, we walked into this charity shop and we saw this perfectly fine chair. I think the lady said it had kind of like hardly been used type thing. It looked very new. We asked for the price. They said £3. When we looked online how much it costs, it was like £80 worth of.
That was £80 secondhand. So
yeah.
This was in perfect condition. It was working fine. It was clean. It was fine. It just wasn't the latest model. So you could see it wasn't. It was like getting a 10-year-old car instead of a brand new car when you looked at the kind of chair it was. Looking for those same older ones online secondhand were coming up at like £80, not even going near getting a new one of the new fancier version.
So that's just an insight into what's out there. Again, what we found is a lot of people, once we actually shared with friends and family that we were having a baby, they were volunteering stuff to us. This is something that our son had. They only wore it for 2 weeks and then it was not used. And so things were offered to us. And again, it's not like you have to accept everything, but some things we then said, okay, yeah, this feels practical, we'll be happy to receive this. And it just minimized things like a travel system. Somebody gifted that to us. We know you can easily spend £300 for one of those. So those are things that just brought our costs down. Again, we keep emphasizing it's up to you to decide what you want to spend money on. So things like a mattress, a bed, you might think, okay, I don't really want my son to be sleeping on a bed that somebody else might have used, so I'll buy it. But there will be ways that you can cut costs. But the key message on this section is there's definitely financial considerations to be made. And if you just walk into it, it might be the difference between you being so strained financially. So that's in a nutshell on finances. When is the best time to have a baby? I like this question. It's something that I thought about, and Tamara and I had a talk about it. Some people prefer to have their children all together as soon as they get married. They have their first one. If they're having more than one, they have another one, and they become a family, and they say, get it done and over done with. But certainly, having reflected on personal preferences and having spoke, it was so important for us to have some us time before children arrived. And us time means, remember, you've been like in a courting sort of process, and I think once you're married is that perfect opportunity to just with the two of you grow in knowing each other a bit more, have personal time together, enjoy experiences. If you're able to go on holiday, do those holidays. It's just the two of you.
And to put it into perspective, Ree was in Sheffield, I was in Leeds, and we both had quite busy schedules with work and church and different things happening. So you could easily get times where we were seeing each other for a couple of hours every 2 weeks, and the rest is just phone conversations. So really, to enjoy life together and enjoy each other's company, we did want that as a key priority for our marriage before children came along.
So again, the timing of when is the best time, I couldn't really put a blanket answer on that. It depends on the couple. What's important to you? Is this time that we're just describing now important, that you grow, you enjoy yourself? What we can certainly tell you from our experience is once the baby does arrive, it's life-changing. A lot of sacrifice comes in, and that sacrifice of your time, sacrifice of the personal space that you might have enjoyed, all of that just changes. So if you do have one quite early on, remember, you might not get to experience that sort of personal time for another 15 years, maybe 18 years. I don't know, when they go out to uni, that kind of thing.
Maybe a bit less once they get a bit more going out to play with friends, but it's definitely something you bear in mind. At the same time, on the other side, you can, especially if you are hesitant, wondering if this is the right step, you can certainly put it off and put it off and put it off. And it's one of those things where you could wait and say when this and this and this, and it never happens, or it happens later than you actually would have decided if you were thinking about it otherwise. So certainly it's a bit like jumping into cold water sometimes. You have to take the plunge.
But the other points relating to time is, I certainly enjoy, now that I do have my 3-year-old son, when I can go out. Like yesterday, we went to the park and we're doing various activities together. And I think it's quite an advantageous position to be in whilst you're young and able to do some active things. Children are full of energy. So I see a benefit in having the children sort of like not in your late stages. Again, this is just on personal preference, so feel free to take the principles out of it and depending on your situation. But there's other things as well, like you hear of time clocks, be it for the ladies and all that lot. You want to be mindful of that when you do think about when. So those are some of the key things around the timing when it's right. It could be that actually you got married when you were in quite a bit of debt, whether by choice or whatever circumstances. And it could be that in your discussions, you might say, it's wise for us to do as much work as we can now to clear off these debts. Then think about having children, because that might have a financial impact of, it could be only one of you can work, certainly maybe full time. And so you're not able to bring in the same income as you used to. So those are some of the other considerations that you need to think about, or just your career. Certainly for some people, once you have a baby, you can't do the same hours at work as you used to. All those sort of things you need to factor in and consider where you are. So those are the key things in a very broad sense. But what I want to close on before I ask Tamara to carry on is this. Children are a gift from God. That's what the Bible tells us. So I believe personally that it's not that any couple will say, we're going to make a baby. Ultimately, it's a gift that comes from God. And sometimes it's not fitting for all situations, which is why sometimes it's actually better not to have one. So in as much as we're talking about all this, about preparing for a baby and all of this lot, we should bear in mind that the actual bringing life into this world, there's only one creator of life that we know of. And so all your trust, or certainly our trust, is still in God's hands to actually then be the giver of life. So on that note, I'll let you hear some more from Tamara. We're actually going to pull this presentation off for now. And so, yeah.
Okay, and so I haven't got a PowerPoint, and my thoughts are possibly not quite structured in the same way that some of the things we shared with. But one of the key things I'd like to start with is to say that please try and glean the principles and the message behind our specific experiences and examples we're sharing. And that's because as you hear many, many times, it really is a different experience for everyone. And people even say there's no two pregnancies the same. People can have very different experiences, even within the same couple. And so in a way, you could then say, well, how can anyone advise anyone? Similarly, you will almost certainly want to do some things differently once you've actually been through it and you look back in retrospect and you think, actually, I wish I'd done that or the other. And to that you can say, so, but again, what's the point? What's the point of coming up with these ideas? And I think for me, while there is a certain amount of value to specific tips, the biggest thing I kind of wish I'd done differently looking back is my understanding of the bigger picture and some of the principles, and being able to prepare on maybe the mental, emotional scale. I think that's even more important than some of the practical tips that you might get and the wish lists, and you need to buy checklists of what you need to buy or how to prepare for this or that. And I think that's because, you know, I've heard stories about people, you hear quite a few, of people who didn't even realize they were pregnant until the baby came. And funnily enough, even though you can spend weeks or months painting nurseries and preparing and buying things and having baby showers, actually, you know, we live in a world where supermarkets are open and there are nappies there, and, you know, some of the basics you pretty much can get hold of, and the baby will be fine if for a couple of days there's a baby you didn't realize was on the way. You will get the things you need, but the mental preparation you can't do in a couple of hours or a couple of days. So kind of the thoughts I'm sharing aren't really so much, as I was saying earlier, not so much a list of, well, there's this point and there's this point to think about, because this really is a huge topic. And that's part of where I felt quite nervous when the request came in to share on this topic, because I thought, well, where do I start and how do I cover it all, and how do I get this, as we said, it's life-changing. Having a child is now your whole life is in a different place to where it would have been otherwise. Excuse me. So I've kind of tried to take a few points of some of the things that I think really for me would have been helpful, but what I'm sharing is a bit more of a sort of fruit salad than a specific meal, because it's points here and there, and some of them I'll really just even mention in passing to say it's worth thinking about this. So the first thing for me is the idea of just planning, like we said. So actually, this links to one thing I kept saying to Ree when we were talking about what we were going to say is do this before you even get pregnant. Think about this before you even get pregnant. And one of the things I think that's important is because it really is so life-changing. And so I listed some of the things that might be completely different once the baby comes along. You hear people say, oh, having a baby changes your world. It's life-changing, and you think, okay, yeah, because now you've got a child, which seems pretty obvious, but there's always other ways that you hadn't expected. So it could be the fact that whenever you travel anywhere, even just for the night, your car is filled with stuff and you need 2 suitcases just for the baby when they're very small, especially. Or that it will now take you 1,000,000 years to leave the house just to go to the post office.
Especially leaving the house with.
Yeah. My mother actually told me once that when she was leaving the house with me, she was supposed to leave at 9 a.m. and she actually got out at 3 p.m. So I haven't quite hit that record yet. But it's things like that that you just don't really think about before the baby comes.
It's something that when you don't have a baby yet, you might not actually understand fully, etc. And I think of when our churches were open and people trickle in at different times, etc. And sometimes you're like, why don't people just be punctual and just arrive for Sabbath school right on time or divine service right on time? And then when you have a baby, you realize, okay, this really does take quite a lot to leave that house, because sometimes in as much as you got up on time, everything was running okay, just to the point where you were stepping out the door, somebody needs changing or whatever that might be, something as simple as that. Or there's a little accident and then you have to go back or whatever it might be. So it's all practical things.
Yeah. So those are small ways in which your life changes. You might have changes in your plans, your goals, your life goals, your priorities that you might not necessarily have thought about, because you can see everyone else seeming to have children and then carry on where they left off, but you don't know how your situation is going to be affected, and it depends on your plans for how you're going to raise and educate your child, for example, or the kind of work you do. I'm, for example, freelance, and so that does have an impact because you're not just taking maternity leave, and if you're going with childcare, you haven't necessarily got a fixed salary. So there's lots of things to bear in mind, and those are things that really are helpful if you think through all the potential scenarios beforehand. Okay, what if it does turn out that we realize one of us is going to have to stop working? What if down the line? What if we do both try and carry on working full time? What will that look like? Bear in mind childcare costs. Look into them, because you know the childcare providers are trying to make a living on childcare, so childcare can't be so cheap that someone can't live on doing it. But then you need it to come out of your salary, so there's things like that to consider. So everything can really change and go on its head once a child comes along. You might have changes in your friendships and what you want from your friendships that you wouldn't have thought about beforehand. Little things like, I've heard people saying, when am I supposed to wash my hair? It seems such a simple thing. You don't think about it before. You might see the need to change house or relocate completely to a different type of area. We ended up changing cars because we didn't want to put a car seat in the back of a 3-door. We thought that's going to be a lot of faff. And then we ended up getting a second car so that I could get to work once I went back to work. So a lot of things may change.
And those are some of the examples of how financially it can have an impact on your household budget when you suddenly need a 7-seater, for example, because you've got 3 of them and there's 2 of you and you need space for X, Y, Z. And
petrol.
And you need a bigger house, you need to move because the house you have is not big enough.
So that's part of the reason why thinking ahead is important. Another reason for thinking ahead and being aware of the potentials is things people don't normally think about. I actually thought about this a lot because my mother's experience. My mum was very ill with all of her pregnancies, and with her last pregnancy, she was in hospital for the last 3 months and was very, very ill. So I think one of the things I found very off-putting about us deciding to have children was, what if that happens to me? They say morning sick, you've got a higher chance of morning sickness if your mother had morning sickness, and higher chance of it being serious if it was serious for your mother. So I found that very, very scary. And I really did struggle with pregnancy for most of the duration of the pregnancy. And that affected my ability to work. I took all of my leave, and then I was doing very part-time hours and I wasn't taking anything else on. And then when I had to go back to work, I struggled with the travel. And so if I was in a position to have just dropped everything, I can see how I would have easily taken that. But I do know people as well who, you know, had to take time off work. So the point I'm trying to make is, you know, we found out we were expecting, and then life was never the same again. And some people kind of plan for, we'll try for a baby, we'll get pregnant, and then 9 months after that, life will change. But you do not know how much life will change even from before the baby comes.
And just to give you an example, if you're thinking about a baby, most of you would have been married or got through that process. Just think about from the day you propose, for most people, that's the actual day that things just change, because now you're so focused on preparing for this wedding. Tamara and I, she shared she was in Leeds, I was in Sheffield. And before I proposed, our conversation where getting to know each other, explore. After I proposed, it was just about wedding planning. When can we get more time? And having a baby can be exactly the same. That once the baby is actually coming, then a lot of your time is now invested in, maybe we're moving house, so now you're spending time researching about houses, areas, schools that are good, whatever, all these different places. And now your time is just consumed on that thing. So definitely
planning, researching, looking up pregnancy symptoms. It's just that you're in a different place and you've got different interests. So, and then I think it's very important to be mentally prepared, because it can be a real emotional roller coaster. And I had no idea of this till a friend of mine actually got sent a video by her mother, who was a midwife in another country, and she was sent a video of some of the terrible conditions that women were having to give birth in. And she was just in tears and said, how could you send this to me when I'm pregnant and emotional? And that's the time it hit me that I've not really come across before what hormones are doing to your body, your mind, your peace of mind at that time. And even once the baby comes, there are so many different theories out there and pieces of advice and books with completely opposing views and articles with opposing views, that if you don't really know which of these are right, or is any of them right, etc., you can end up feeling very guilty or very stressed, not knowing what to do and feeling it's really important that I know which one's right. And so there are a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into depending where you're coming from. So that's, again, an area where being mentally prepared before, doing a bit of research before, and knowing that it will be okay no matter which way I try and go, can kind of help get through that. Things that people weren't expecting on how they would react, they might become very possessive. And we mentioned postnatal depression. It's not necessarily just people who get very serious depression or are diagnosed with it. That whole experience, all those hormones, it does tend to reflect on, you know, you can not expect it to not have an impact. People being protective, even against spouses sometimes, you know, the other parent, thinking you're not changing them right, and you laugh, but it can be really, you know, heart-wrenching. And you do read a lot about how it can affect those marriages and put a strain, some of the difficulties and the different ways of thinking or doing things, and having that freedom to allow each other to do things your own way and know that they're not harming the baby because they like to dress them this way and not that way, and be able to let that go is important. One tip, and I mean, a big tip when it comes to advice, is to choose what you're going to go with and be happy to do that. And that includes our advice as well. That's why we're trying to give very much more generic advice rather than you should do this. One thing that I'm glad I did though is I set up a WhatsApp broadcast list of everyone I wanted to notify about the baby before the baby came. And then a few hours after the baby had come, when we were a bit more settled down, asked Ree to send out the message to that broadcast list, and then switched the phone off. And then 5 days later, as I remember, switched it back on and said, oh, sorry for the delay, but you take your time out.
Yeah, because just on that point, we were talking about how emotionally challenging it can be, draining. So when you're going through that phase, the baby's arriving, there's a lot of activity happening anyway, and the demands of trying to keep up with family and friends, letting them know, replying. Yes, these messages are well meant, but it can be draining. I speak for myself particularly. Ask me to spend 20 minutes just responding to messages. It actually gets me a little bit exhausted. So it's good to just pace yourself if you have to switch off for a few days. People know that the baby safe has arrived, so you send that message, then just at your own pace, when you're ready, you can start to reply and respond, etc.
So in terms of stuff, we're not going to go into specifics while we're doing the Sabbath hours, and that's something I'm happy to share privately. Some of my tips: if I were to do things differently, I think I would want a lot less stuff and want to spend a lot less money. It's easy to say once you've had a first one and you've got some of the stuff already, but personally, one thing we were really grateful for, more than some of the items, when some of them are lovely, but it's not necessarily, even some of the things I thought were great gifts, I ended up not using. But the gift vouchers or money, it sounds like, oh, the money, but because things come all at once and the baby's there, people say, don't just buy 0 to 3s, but then once Ethan was, 2 years old, we were still able to get new clothes when he'd grown out of something from some of the gift vouchers. Just be careful not to let them lapse. And so on another line, when it comes back to the emotional side, as I said, mine's a bit more of a fruit salad, going back and forth a bit, but try not to get sucked into the internet. It can be a very useful place to find things out, but when you're stressed, it can be a place to enhance stress. So one of the big issues I had when Ethan was very young, I really struggled with his reflux. He had really bad reflux, bringing up milk, and he looked like he was, to use a very biblical sounding term, distressed to the point of death. And it was really wrenching my heart, and I didn't know what was wrong, what to do. And all I could find online were things either giving advice that just didn't work, or telling you not to do the only thing that did work because you really shouldn't do that, and making you feel guilty and really trapped. Or people saying, oh, reflux, I remember that was the worst, I just thought it was terrible. And I'm like, yes. And then they said, but it just still passes and it'll be fine. And you're like, that's not what I need to hear right now. But actually having come out on the other side wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was the truth. You came out and you can look in retrospect and say, that was horrible, I really struggled, but it was fine, and he was fine, and he is fine. So trying to avoid the internet and trust that God has heard your prayers. Because for me, during that time, one of the things that I just felt like I need the answer of it just going away and being fine from now. That's the answer to prayer I need, and I'm not getting it. But it's in retrospect that I can see God carrying me through, and Ethan was fine. God knew Ethan was fine, and I needed to know that God had heard and had left it. I just needed to trust there. So trying to go a little bit into some of the more general ideas here. Thinking about what you really need, and I hinted at this a second ago. I was reading before Ethan was born, I was looking into the idea of baby-led potty training a lot. And that really appealed to me because the idea of changing nappies seemed horrible and I didn't know how I was going to cope with it. And in the end, it was fine. But I became convinced that I'd love it if I could do the baby-led potty training idea. And one lady's articles on that spoke about, she said, I'm on my whatever number child now and got it down to a T. I don't need anything, no pram, no wipes, no nappies. She just has her sling and she's fine and she's free and not laden with all this baby stuff. I thought, that's where I want to be. And it's not necessarily where I got. But when you look back, you can see you had a great time when Ethan was younger, and we're definitely having a great time now. And so, yes, plan and choose your preferences and your aims, but don't, be open to other ideas and be open to it's not necessarily all going to go to plan, and that's fine. So for example, you hear people say, I'm not going to buy any baby food, I'm going to prepare everything from scratch because it's healthier. And then if you end up not doing that, just be calm. So on the one hand, when it comes to, say, labour, I remember having grown up hearing people like my mother say it's the worst thing ever, you can't imagine how bad it is, and it's worse than you could possibly think. And that isn't what you want to think about once you're pregnant and like it or not, it's coming. But on the other hand, I had people someone share that it wasn't that bad at all, and we shared the story of a colleague who it was only 2 hours, and I heard all these stories and I latched onto them because that was a lot easier to hope that you might get a story like that. And then I really wasn't prepared for what labour really was like for me, and that made it harder for me to actually just respond to it the way that would be most helpful. And so on the one hand, try not to do what I was trying to avoid. Try not to be pessimistic or paralysed by fear, not just about labour, but I mean about any of the stuff that sounds like it might be difficult. But also don't block out the opportunity to be prepared for the worst. So not expecting the worst, but being prepared so that no matter what comes, you can just face it in any aspect of having children or parenting.
I think it's also a principle that applies with most things in life in general. Having that optimism sometimes is the difference between you carrying on and being able to get through to the end, as opposed to sometimes you just struggle at the first hurdle. So that balance can't be emphasized enough to say you want to have thought about the potential challenges and prepare yourself for them, but don't just focus now that, it's going to be terrible, it's the worst thing ever, because mentally it does get to you. Now just see yourself going past it and how you're going to be able to get past it. Then those positive expressions will actually help you along.
When it comes to friendships, obviously don't ditch your non-baby friends, hold on to but at the same time, seek out, which you probably will do anyway, seek out baby friends as well. Other people at a similar stage to you really can be helpful. And also sharing your expertise with people who are at an earlier stage can, be a good distraction and a great way to reflect even on how far you've come and how far God's brought you. Just when you're talking about it's not just with children, it can be with work or whatever. Sometimes it's a lot easier to share what you're going through with someone who can identify and who can say things and you go, yes, someone understands, and even that in itself helps. Obviously, you will have great friends and great family and great advisors who may not have ever had children, and they can be the most wonderful people to turn to, not turn on. But sometimes there may be times where the feedback doesn't help because it's really about understanding exactly where you are. So that might be something to bear in mind. To me, I put a big star on this point, and we're getting to a close. And I know it's been a bit of bitty information, but hopefully they're kind of food for thought and things to go away and consider. In terms of character development, we said children are a gift from God, and they're not just a gift, they're a trust and a responsibility. And he has given us this charge and said, this is a potential soul for my kingdom, and I'm entrusting them into your care to do your utmost to ensure they get there. Ultimately, obviously, that's that individual's decision, but you make conditions as favourable as possible for that. And so character building is a big part of what God's asking us to do. And one of the things I've reflected on as I see Ethan grow up is that who you are is all you have to pass on. And I see the worst of myself in Ethan sometimes. I see things and I'm like, why are you doing that? And I realise you get this from me. And I wish I'd addressed those traits earlier so that he wouldn't have had any of those negative things to pick up on. And that's something that if you're, wherever you are, even if you're already seeing that in a child who's already here, you can do something about it. But even if it's something really simple like keeping your place decluttered and being on top of your tidying, Then when you want to tell your child tidy up your toys and you're feeling hypocritical if that's not something you're good at, obviously you normally have to tidy up your toys, but you're not good at keeping on top of stuff yourself. It's just an example of how talking to each other, prayerfully asking God, what's the thing that would be most helpful for me to work on before I'm a parent, so that can help in my guiding someone else's character. So there are some things that I'm not actually going to talk about, things like the question of home births, or some of what it can be like being pregnant. You hear people talking about having their tummy touched by strangers and really not wanting that. There's a lot of, as I said, this is a huge topic, but saying with the, I'm going to try and stay with the kind of spiritual theme that I'm kind of come towards at the end. If you are, though, still thinking about some of those physical things, like physically things after birth and soon after birth that you don't really hear and people don't really tell you about, and every single new mother is saying, why didn't anyone tell me this? I'm not recommending this book, I'm just mentioning it because I haven't read it, but my father actually read a book called Nobody Told Me, and it's a lady who's just sharing what childbirth and pregnancy and all of this was like, and all the things nobody had told her about, from breastfeeding to anything else. And it was just the idea of ask people what to expect, ask someone who's a midwife, just ask people what are the things that nobody ever told you, what are the things that people still don't talk about, someone who you can trust and who will be happy to share that kind of stuff. But know that no two experiences are ever the same as well. So if they have any horror stories, don't panic. But as I say, sharing on some of those spiritual things to close. The Bible says in 1 Timothy 2 verse 15, and this I've always thought could be a bit of a non-politically correct text. It's just after the Bible talks about Adam wasn't deceived, but the woman was the first to be deceived. And then it says, notwithstanding, she shall be saved in child-rearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. And I always thought that's a bit of a touchy subject. It's like kind of saying if they have children and they bring them up and if they do a good job, then they can be saved. But something I get from that text that I've kind of reflected on as a mother now is very similar to what you might have heard in, say, marriage counselling. I remember the pastor who did our marriage counselling saying, you're now two rough diamonds in the rough getting thrown into a bag, and on life's journey you just get shaken together and the rough bits knock off each other until you get smoothed into a precious stone. And that was kind of an analogy for how the ups and downs and having to learn and communicate and grow, that you can be helping each other towards the kingdom. And I can see how, for me, I've had to learn patience, I've had to learn perseverance, I've had to learn so many things. I've had to learn to be, calm and take someone along a long journey as I'm trying to train up a child in the way he should go. And that's actually been really beneficial in my own character. And there's a song that says, you will always be a child to me. And that's supposed to be God looking at us and saying, I see you the way you see a child. And I've had examples that we haven't got time to mention because we're wrapping up now, but of how we learn about God's love for us. We learn about our disobedience when we see disobedience and we're frustrated by it in our own children. And that having children is really a wonderful lens to be part of God's plan and to get a bird's eye view and a greater, deeper understanding of God's plan, if that's the way you choose to go. And if that's the way God leads you, those are some of the benefits there. So I'd just like to close with a couple of best moments, but I'll let you.
Yeah, some final thoughts before we open up to your questions is my journey of being a father has really shown a light of how this helps me as an individual prepare me for eternity. I read through the Bible and I see the life of Jesus being the one of sacrifice, putting others first, living his life not for himself, but for others. And trust me, once you have a child, you'll see a lot of that just naturally come out in your life, or it's asked of you. We spoke about how your time is just drained. Most of the time is taken out by this child. If you enjoyed, let's say, when you came back from work, you just want to unwind on Snapchat or Facebook or whatever it is, likely you won't be doing that. You'll be spending time with your son when you come back from work or whatever it might be. And I see lots of moments where I might have done something else, but because I have a son, I will do something that's in his favor or that helps his growth and development. And this for me is perhaps some of the benefit of having a son, because it does ask of you questions that help mold you into a better person, into a more Christ-like person. And I think that's similarly to what Tamara was sharing. But go ahead, Tia, and share your best moments as we close off.
And I'll just say one thing that I wasn't prepared for is how not possessive, but how worried you suddenly become as a mother, or I suddenly became. And Ree would laugh at me because we're going down the motorway. I'm like, that lorry's going to come into us. And I never had that panic, but I couldn't drive with lorries for like a year of Ethan's life. And, you know, Ree would be carrying him in the carry on a walk. I'm like, what if you trip and fall? What then as soon as Ethan's walking? What if he trips and falls? But things that I've loved, and we may have kind of dealt with more of it seems almost the negative side of things to watch out for. But I think that's because the lovely moments, we all know about the lovely moments. We can imagine, we know what it's like to see a baby, and they will come. The lovely moments will be there, and will be there in abundance. But you don't kind of need to prepare yourself for those and know about some of those. But that's where I just like to end with some of the lovely moments. Best moments of being a parent so far for me, seeing him develop, seeing him grow a mind and intelligence, or even physically being able to, you know, reach for the toys. That's been beautiful. Seeing him enjoy things, his laughter, his giggles, it just brings a smile to your face. Sharing with him, teaching him, sharing pictures of when I was young, things that I love and I think are cool. And there's much more I could mention, the joy he brings to others, especially our families. But this for me, I'm going to end on, because it's the fun one, is I love the excuse to be a kid again.
And I do see that in Tamara. She does love being a child, whether it's crawling on the ground with Ethan or whatever that might be. So I think let's welcome some questions and have some interaction with you at this time.
Hi guys.
Hey guys.
Yes, hello Martin and Yasha.
Hi.
Hi guys.
Hi. We're going to go to our question and answer. The first question that I have for you from the audience is, what has been your biggest test you have faced as parents, and how did you handle it?
Certainly a few tests, so we're just going through them, trying to escalate one to the top. And Kirsty, feel free to go.
I don't know. I find that an interesting question. I guess because there's different ways you could look at tests. In my head, I'm thinking a test of character, or a test of, are you going to make the right choice? But I don't think that's necessarily what the person meant. But the biggest thing that has tested you, I think it's had to make me more aware of my own thoughts and feelings, and more analytical, and accept sometimes what I'm aiming for in what we do with Ethan, or how we're going to do it, may not be rational. It might just be me trying to reach out for the easiest solution. For me, there's been a big one in terms of how now, having a small child, and the decisions we've taken about what we're interested in further down the line with education and stuff is going to impact my career, and that I may have to let go of some things. So at one point, this really, I can, and no, Mimi can relate to, because it's one of the industries that she's really excellent in, is web design. And I've always had this techie love. And so I was starting to get into that, and I was even starting to get some really interesting inquiries. I'd be I really wanted to follow through. Once I started to feel impressed, this is more than you can take on with the other things you're trying to do, and this is the most obvious one to let go of, and that was a really hard decision for me to make. But it had to be done.
That's fine. Yeah, rather than spend ages on the same question, perhaps if we go to the next one and just swap over as we go.
Great. So you mentioned when you were doing the presentation on preparation, you mentioned about the antenatal classes. Do they have any contradictions on our beliefs? Do you find any of the things from the classes that contradicts with what we believe?
So thinking back to them, I don't necessarily see many things that stand out as contradicting biblical principles. I am thinking fast. There wasn't like a strong deviation, obviously, with anything that's not necessarily run from a Christian perspective. You always have to be alert and mindful at what might be shared. But a lot of what they were sharing is just what will happen the day the baby arrives, what do you need to get ready when the baby starts, all those sort of practical things. So they were not necessarily posing themselves as things that are anti what we should stand for as Christians.
Yeah.
I think an example of some of the things that were there, one of my first, so about a month before the baby was due, at my mum and my family's church down south, they had a surprise baby shower for me and for another friend who was also expecting, and they had games there, and one of them was get the two dads to dress up a doll, to like put the nappy on and put the clothes on, and it was like they had to, who was going to be quickest, and Ree won because he had a cheeky head start, because one of the things they'd had us do in the antenatal classes was practice bathing a doll and changing a doll's nappy and dressing the doll. So this was like he's had a practice run. So it's a silly example, but I think it would have the kind of differences.
And that practice on my brother.
He also had a 17-year difference between him and his brother, so he had some experience with a young one first.
Right.
But it would have the same kind of differences as you might find in your everyday life. So they might talk about what can you do for, to relax when the baby's asleep, and they might say have a glass of wine, and we're perfectly capable of just filtering and knowing, well, I won't be having a glass of wine, but getting the principle. So not that I remember from classes we went to.
But certainly I think there were a lot of practical things that I took away from somebody who hadn't had a child and you don't know what to expect, and yes, all those practical things, how to change the nappy and whatever. So those are some of the things that came out of the antenatal classes.
It was a science of how your body works in pregnancy and childbirth, and some of like what your options are going to be during pain relief, and that kind of helped to know a bit more about what these things mean and what exactly involves. And if you ever want to be put off an epidural, go to an antenatal class to find out about how an epidural works, and you won't want to go near it.
I think that's where knowledge, it's often said knowledge is power, and I think those classes just help inform, like Tamara said, more the science of what's happening and the awareness of what your options are.
Yeah, makes sense.
I was also going to say that myself and Miriam, we didn't go for antenatal classes. But later on, when we were reflecting and when we were just discussing some of the experience with other people, we found that we should have actually gone for them, because they would have helped us a lot in knowing a lot more about what was required. Simple things like changing a baby when they arrive, like Rhea and Tamara said, has been, it really does make a difference. So I would recommend them if you've got an opportunity to do so.
And they'll answer some of the questions that people have, like, is it better to breastfeed a baby or bottle feed? Those things, we're probably not going into that today, and sabotage, etc. What if it was just practical stuff, going through your options and things?
Okay.
You mentioned, Tamara, that you had some reflex issues and you had some emotional, and seeing your baby Ethan struggling, depressed there. From emotional side, how did Ree support you, and how did Ree yourself support your wife during that time? what kind of advice or tips in terms of supporting your wife or supporting your other spouse when they are going through emotional distress, that kind of situation?
I think I'll probably answer that because I don't think I gave Ree as much chance to help me, because I don't think I shared as much of what I was going through with him necessarily. And it's not that I was hiding it from him. It'd be, you know, these issues might be in the middle of the night, there's only one of you up and you don't think about it because you're just in the room thinking about what you're going through. But I remember reading an article by someone who was saying how she just felt exhausted and she'd had enough and she needed a break, and she asked her husband to take the baby and just let her have a nap. And like within, I don't know if it was 10 minutes or half an hour, she could hear crying, and then the husband just brought the baby and put him back in the room next to her. Like, I can't do this, so just left him with the mum. And she wrote a long article kind of complaining to her partner, saying, couldn't you have just helped me out this once? And I think the biggest way Ree was a real support is that I couldn't identify with that article at all, because I felt Ree was going above and beyond what a father might think they should be contributing in the practical things. He would be pacing up and down in the night for an hour at a time, listening to podcasts while trying to get a baby back to sleep. When he has to go to work in the morning, he was helping with everything. He was supportive and caring for the child and caring for me in a way that does make a difference. And I know he would always be wanting and willing to try and help in any way he could if I was wanting to talk as well.
Oh, thank you very much. There's another question here, which is in regards to naming kids. Is it something that we need to think about prior to us having them? And on that as well, what would you say if the wife and the husband have got miles apart in which name they need? How do you come to a compromise, or what tips can you give in regards to that?
I think we had a spreadsheet of names. And names, it probably went numbers-wise. Can you remember?
I don't know the numbers, but we were struggling to narrow it down to enough.
There's quite a lot of boys' names. Girls finding a bit difficult. We're so glad when he arrived and he was a boy, and we could focus on that list. But to answer the question directly, yes, definitely, you need to be thinking about names, talking about them. You'll be surprised that it might actually take you quite a while to arrive at a name that you're all happy with, because you've got to balance between the two of you, and especially where you've got different cultures, different nationalities. You might need to talk about which language your name is in and come to an agreement. You might need to consider your family's input. Grandparents normally have a key sort of input when it comes to naming as well, and you want to consider that and make sure you've had enough dialogue. So I would just say, when it comes to names, try and think about them as early as you can, and certainly spend as much time talking about them.
And that's exactly one of the examples where I'd say some of the things you want to think and plan about, you might want to do so before you're even pregnant, even when it still seems something in the future. Because like we said, grandparents normally have an input. That's actually not necessarily the case in all cultures. And so if you're from different cultures, or even if you're from the same culture, but you have different preferences, but other people might expect or want to be able to even give suggestions or whatever, you'd want to know that when you can discuss it and discuss your preferences before it's an emotional topic for everyone. I think interestingly for us, we had a long list of boys' names, but we didn't actually both agree on any of the top choices. So the ones I liked best, Ree wasn't as keen on. The ones Ree liked best, I didn't like as much. And Ethan was the first one we just came across, and I thought, I like that name because we had, want it to be biblical, want to like the meaning. There were some really lovely names that had such silly meanings.
You'd be surprised actually once you start looking at names. I won't say the one that's coming in my head now, but the meaning of it is smelly hair. Exactly. Believe it or not, that's what the meaning of it is. But this is actually a name that we considered like, yeah, that sounds like a nice name. And then you come to looking at meanings, you're like, when my child is asked, what does your name mean? They have to respond, maybe not that one.
Yeah. So when I said Tari, like I was actually reading the Bible and got to the Psalms, and there was one that said by Ethan. So I was like, oh, I like that name. And look, it's a biblical name. And then said, Ree, what do you think of this? It was like, actually one of Ethan's middle names is Tinashe, and that one we both actually agreed we liked before we were even thinking about children. And so yeah.
That's the one that came out from those early discussions before the babies. Just Tinashe being mentioned already. Yeah.
Nice. One more question that we have is, what are the key changes? I know you've mentioned a couple of changes that you faced when you were preparing to have a child, but what are the key, I would say maybe top 3 key changes that you guys had to make in preparing for a child?
So this might seem a silly one. It's not key in terms of the most important. It's one that just kind of almost was a symbol of what's to come, in that we had to tear our study down to, you know, put the, you know, big desk that goes around the whole room, put it in the loft to make a nursery. And I say that's kind of a symbol because, you know, we're now at our dining room table in what was the sunroom, because the dining room that was behind those doors there stopped being a dining room very soon after we started weaning, and our carpet was getting covered with smashed avocado and whatever, and it's now a playroom. And I've seen that where people I know have had a lovely house that you just, you know, young couple, you're going to entertain and have your friends around for dinner parties, and suddenly it's covered in children's toys from wall to wall. And so I think that's it's kind of everything about your home suddenly becomes a symbol of the new stage of life you're at, and there's not nice sayings on your fridge, it's like hand paintings and things.
Yeah, on that same subject, so I remember being invited to Sabbath lunch to another family, and their house, they had a lovely house in a lovely location, but you went in, it was almost bare. It's just carpets and just the seat over there, and the rest is just ground. And I found it odd, you know, to the point where you can't help but ask. And they just happily shared to say, oh, we've got kids. And, you know, when you've got kids, I just wanted to leave as much room for them to run around and play and not be constantly saying, don't touch that, because they're going for your precious, whatever this that you put in your house. And there's glass furniture, there's hazards, there's this. So these are some of the changes that you might see, like Tamara was saying, dining room just got ripped out and it's now a playroom. There's like a play, etc. But there's the other things that maybe you might not rank as big, but simple things like the car we mentioned about was the first change that happened before he had even arrived. You might have a car that you like and suddenly it's not practical and suitable. Yeah, that was my first sort of, I got that car when it was 6 months new and I used to like it, etc. But we had to say goodbye and welcome something that's more family friendly. So that's a change. Tamara made reference to work. Again, that's a big one where people don't consider that ahead of time. To say you have a choice of either maybe letting somebody else look after your son or daughter for most hours and be the one that trains them and teaches them the first knowledge, or we will have to make that sacrifice to say, I'm doing well at work, I've got career ambitions, but maybe I need to wrap back the hours a bit and give them a bit more time so that I've got the input into the Christian values and education that I want them to have. So that's another, again, big change that we're certainly still working our way through at the moment.
And not all changes will be changes you make, and there might be some that are really positive. Obviously, there's some obvious ones that are really positive. You might take a lot more photos, but I would advise trying to curb the habit a bit. I used to notice that Ethan would have this smile and really capture it and remember it, and then I'd get the camera, and obviously children at that age, when they're really small babies, they're learning by latching onto faces and expressions, and then they smile because they recognize human being or mummy or daddy, and then you just put a piece of machinery in between you, and I'm like, he's not smiling anymore. And I take like 25 pictures of the same thing, trying to catch something that you can't get on camera because it's what you're seeing. So if you have to put the camera away sometimes to enjoy the moment and free up space on your phone, I think that's also great. But you might see more of your family in a good
Just
way.
Talking about cameras, I was so surprised the first time it happened, where our son literally just said, "Put that away, put that down." You know, like when you're trying to take moments of him, etc. And he's just like, "I'm not a cartoon. I'm not here to just like do things." And so it's good, like Tamara is saying, to appreciate the moments. And sometimes you just have to use these eyes as your camera and photograph and retell when it's appropriate to, etc. But certainly watching Tamara's devices, I think she was somebody who was into photography anyway. It seems to carry over from the family, maybe from Ashley, etc. But her phone just went to, I don't know, 3,000 photos a day or something crazy when he was born, because constantly taking.
Interesting.
Thank you. I wanted to find out what are some of the blogs that you that you've read, if you have them, to make them available, and just if you can remember them, just to let us know which blogs you read as well.
I think between us, Tamara is definitely the blogger. I tend to do less blogs and stuff like that, so I'll let her take this one.
I'm not sure I can, that said, I'm not sure I can be as helpful in this area. I more used to look online for stuff when there was a specific issue I was looking for, and I'd find articles on that rather than following a blog as much. I used to actually follow someone in America called Simple Mum. I think she changed the name of it, but that was before we were even married. I think it was when we were engaged, and it didn't seem as relevant because she was someone with, you know, kids around 3, 5, and she had very different things, but I just found her writing interesting. And I don't even think her blog is still up. So yeah, in terms of online spaces, one thing I did read about, which looked like an interesting resource for women just wanting to share openly experiences about pregnancy, miscarriage, trying for children, lots of things around there, is an app that was featured on the Apple App Store called Peanut. I actually downloaded it quite recently, and I didn't really spend very long on it, so I can't really give much of an answer as to whether it's very useful or not. But I do know that there certainly is a lot out there, even though that's not as helpful as saying you should read this, this, and this one.
But on the topic of reading, one of the things I would highly encourage you to read, even before you've had the baby, because that's when you might have more time, read Child Guidance. That book by Ellen White is so rich in terms of the counsels that it gives when the baby arrives. A lot of the questions that might come up, or some of the things you need to think about ahead of time, is in there. Another book that's really useful is Education. I'm just going over it again right now, packed with very, very practical things for parents to think about. And one of the key things I'll just share in a nutshell, it starts talking about how education is seen in the everyday sense as which school are you going to send your child to, and how you're going to work their way to get a career that's successful, to actually think about from a biblical perspective, what is our goal in life, to education not being around the life now, but the life to come. How do you educate your son from day one to be fit for the kingdom? And that really transforms how you approach their education and their upbringing, and some of the decisions you would have to make about where your house is or whatever it might be. So I definitely recommend those two reads, Child Guidance and Education, both of them by Ellen White.
And I'd say I definitely agree with that 100%. I'd also say at the same time, don't give yourself too much of a reading list and make it like a university reading list that you've got to tick all of these off. Know that these are excellent resources that are out there, but once when you were pregnant, I was like, we have to read through the Bible, we have to read Adventist Home, we have to read Education, we have to read Child Guidance, and obviously you're not going to get through all of that. You don't want to feel guilty because you haven't got through all of that, but know that those are there. I used to, well, I work at York part-time, and I used to put Child Guidance on just the audio to play as I was going between York, and that was like the time to listen to it. So that's up to fairly recently. And it's just something that I was like, it's such a rich resource. It's not something to say, okay, I'm going to read it, now I've read it. it's just something to keep going through and keep going over, because I'd hear things like the third or fourth time and then it would sink in or whatever. So it's helped me a lot on my parenting journey. And I didn't read many books because they just seem very daunting. I got lent some books and recommended some books. I didn't actually read that many, but there are a lot out there, and I've heard a lot of recommendations, so ask around as well.
Okay. The question is, what considerations can couples make in deciding which parent stays home with the kids?
I think for that one, you need to consider everything and talk about everything, from your own desires, your own expectations, your own fears, to your current situation. Like, does one of you have like shift contract work while another of you has a permanent full-time position? Then how we decided which city we were going to live in. I was on a fixed term contract that was part-time, and Ree was on a permanent full-time contract. So why would he come to me when he's doing more hours for more security? So as it is, it wouldn't make sense for Ree to give up his full-time position while I carry on doing something which a lot of the time relies on freelancing. Working won't have built up yet. So you also, you might take into account cultural expectations. You don't have to be like fixed to them. You do what you think seems best, and as you pray about it and as God leads. But I think for me, with any kind of planning, we will tell you, I like to just get all of the information down on the table and then try and sort through it and work out what makes sense for us. But one thing I would say is I've seen through some social media recently, people talking about how, ladies saying that it's important for them to make sure they work so that they're not depending on their husbands. You can talk about it from kind of a life security kind of point of view, but sometimes it was almost that kind of movement that's talking a lot about, women's independence, and we need to show that we don't need you, and I can do it on my own kind of idea coming in as well. And I think we have to be very careful about that, because when you get married, you're saying, okay, we're going to become a team and do life and do the journey to the kingdom when you're a Christian couple together. And so when we're a team, then it doesn't matter, if we're all bringing in and we're all being appreciated for what we're bringing in, raising the children, helping look after the home, that's all part of our family journey, and we're doing this together. So if one person at one time is doing all of the paid work side of things, that's their current contribution to our family team, as it were. And things will change and whatever at different points, but let's not be kind of competing against each other, because we're a family, and so what helps one helps the other. I would say though, even if one person's doing all the paid work, it's definitely still helpful to at least have that person trying to fit in some help with the other side of things, because it's hard to appreciate each other when you don't get a taste of what it's like to be in each other's shoes. I mean, I will never know what it's like to be a metallurgist, but that I can appreciate without trying it. But yeah, I do some things that Ree usually does, and I'm like, wow, this is hard work. Thank you. So.
Yeah, agree entirely what Tamara has just said. I'll share with you a paraphrase again from one of Ellen White's writings. She writes about the greatest work you could do is raising up a child. This is a paraphrase, like I said. And the way that she pitches it is, it leaves you in no doubt that above all else you could do, even in ministry, there's more emphasis placed on how important it is bringing up those young ones. And once I read that, it sort of stayed in my mind to say that's the number one important work. So when couples talk about who's going to do more work, it's sort of like career-wise, and who's going to do more time looking after the young one, the one who's doing the greater work is the one who's raising up that young one. That's far more important. So we should, as people who believe in the Bible and believe in God, be considering those things when we're discussing, because often the kind of everyday person thinks about, oh yeah, you're a stay-at-home dad, stay-at-home mom, and it's almost like the less important. But in God's eyes, that's the number one work, because right there is the great responsibility of raising up somebody for the kingdom. And you read about how parents, we are entrusted, and it will be asked of us what we did with the children God entrusted to us. So I highly appreciate anyone who's staying at home, raising a little one. That's the biggest work that's there. And having said that, just to finish a point, I'm currently off work this week. I have been, and I'm off next week as well. So I'm spending a lot of time with our son, and it just, I can't say enough, because normally it's Tamara who's been doing a lot of spending her time at home with him, etc. I'm just so valuing her and what she does now, because you realize how challenging it is, how involved it is. And if you haven't done it, I would just say, look for the next opportunity where you can reverse roles, where one person is with the children most of the time, if it used to be the other way. And I just started appreciating Tamara a lot more this week, because I just realized how much she's giving of her own in order to look after Ethan, our son. And so go ahead and have that discussion, but bear in mind that the one who's doing the greatest number one work is the one who's raising that young one.
An important thing on that, it does, I wanted to say something going both ways, but if I remember it, I'll come back to it. But one thing that when I actually saw this question that came to mind, a friend of mine from school put on his LinkedIn an article about how he had shared parental leave with his wife, but not normally when they do shared parental leave, it's like the wife might take the first however many months and then the husband takes some months, but they decided to take their shared leave at the same time. And actually it is hard work, especially when they're, well, not especially when they're younger, in different ways when they're younger to when they're older. But the idea, if you can do it, I mean, my contract wasn't enough hours for shared leave to really work for us. But the idea of considering a way that even if it's just for a few weeks or a month, that you can both be at home, because that really is enriching to do it together and to share the lovely moments, and also to share the difficult moments can really make a difference. I had a lot of physical issues, like I'd hurt my leg during the childbirth process, and I couldn't even get upstairs on my own. So I was in hospital because of Ethan more than that, but we were in hospital for almost a week when he was born. So that was Ree's first week of half of his parental leave already gone. And so we were home for a week and knew I wasn't really ready yet. So my dad was there. He came and stayed with us for a couple of weeks to help with the baby. But not everybody will have that luxury. So sometimes looking at ways you might do things together, or even just planning time out that you say, okay, every Sunday will be family time and we'll do things together. But I've also learned a lot from, like, we were looking at educational materials and things to share with Ethan, and I've had them for I don't know how long and said, this looks hard to get my head around, and we just asked for it this week. I sent it to him and he's already printed things out and said, we went out and we learned about trees, and what did we learn today, Ethan? So that really was a lesson to me, and just run with it. So you can learn things from each other's ways of doing things if you're both having a go as well. And it's just rewarding.
Yeah, final thing I would say for me is you do realize also, if once you do have a child, they bond with you the more time you spend with them. It's the same with us in most relationships, whether with one another, whether with Christ. The more time you're spending with the other person, then you're drawing closer together. And seriously, the more time I've been able to spend time with our son, I do see how, yes, it's helping me bond with him, and the other way around. So I think as a couple, it's wise to consider more and more opportunities where you can try and balance out the time spent with your children, so that they're having that time with both parents. And I was always inspired when there's some people we know who are doctors, both of them. And one point, this is the husband, he was off work for, like, I think if I remember correctly, it might have been even close to a year, and like literally not working. It was his wife who was working. And in talking to him, I was like, what's going on? And he says, no, I just realized I wasn't having enough time with our daughter. And he just decided, you know what, these crazy 5 o'clock starts and come back at home at 9 o'clock. It's just not working. I just want dedicated time with our young one. And he did it. And I thought to myself, it's not many men who might have easily done that, and seeing how hard it could be and all the sort of stigma that goes with that. But I think one of the key things we might have already mentioned is don't do things for the sort of image and what people think and the outside, what's expected. Do things because they're the best for your family, for your son, for your daughter, and that's what God wants you to do.
Yeah. One more question. I think this is so this question is saying what are the key consideration when choosing a nursery would you advise?
For me, it's interesting that we seem to live in a culture here at the moment where it's just almost expected. Like, so once Ethan got to a certain age, people are like, he's in nursery now, right? Or isn't he in nursery yet? You'll be going to nursery soon. Like sometimes they'll say it to him without even asking. Or yeah, even when you're pregnant, they're like, register for nursery now because the waiting lists are crazy and you won't get in otherwise. Ethan's never been to nursery. We have a childminder who is a friend of mine anyway, and she came highly recommended by other friends of mine, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend her too. Like, I've learned from her about bringing up my own son. And he's, as I say, I'm quite part-time, so I think the most he was with her at my busiest time was about 2.5 days a week, so about half time of the working week. And I think if you, like, childcare is so well regulated nowadays. It's not to say that there aren't people who aren't great for your child, and I've heard of people who've said like the au pair was just giving their child the phone if they had an au pair. But like in terms of, you know, safety and a good education, like you probably are going to find that in most places around. But if you're coming from a Christian perspective, from an Adventist perspective, even little things like we have friends whose like children were given pork at school, even though they've said however many times they don't eat that, because it's hard for people to remember your specific needs and it's not really the focus for them. But to know that he's with someone who understands exactly where I'm coming from a spiritual perspective, who's trying to instill the right values in him, who also wants to see him brought up the right way, even understands some of the dietary things about what we give and don't give him from a different perspective, has meant a lot. That, you know, that by God's grace that he's in safe hands.
2 examples that come to mind. One is of my brother. So like Tamara mentioned, or what we referred to earlier on, this big age gap between me and my brother. So actually how he was young, etc. And just seeing when he went out to nursery, etc., he went to a relatively sort of medium to biggish nursery. So there's lots of children there, lots of staff. And he just had this experience of he's one of many beings, you could almost say. It's not like that personal attention, but also because it's done professionally, but it's not from necessarily a Christian perspective. And so the idea of like seeing others going out for a fag or for a smoke, let me say, or whatever it might be, they were little hints of things that we saw when he started talking, that sometimes even his speech with my brother, it's like, clearly it's not language we use at home. So he must be getting it when he goes out in nursery, because he was doing like a 9 to 5 when he was there. So you pick it out while he's away.
And it's not to say, you know, don't go with the nursery, or you have to go with you have to go with a childminder, or it has to be an Adventist childminder. It's nothing like that at all, but it's just sharing what we did and why, and also the idea of do think about it, do pray about it, do think about what your values are, and you might see that difference in the different places you go. I remember my parents going with us to look at different schools when we came back to the UK after living abroad for a while, and they were wanting to talk to the teachers, they were wanting to see the classrooms, and they also asked us, what did you think of this school, did you like this school? So it's just that do it with some thought. But along the lines of what we said, my parents have always told me, like, I came back from my childminders in Manchester and would take a pretend cigarette out of my mouth and give it to them and say, "Hold me cig," because that's what my childminders said to each other. So children are sponges. That's something to bear in mind.
So when I said 2 things when I started talking, that was the second example I had in mind, of Tamara sharing of her childhood memory, saying, "Hold me cig," because he's got it from the childminder. So I won't have to repeat that one, but just to say, yes, if you are thinking about a nursery, then those are some of the things you'll have to consider to say what kind of education or environment is my child going to be in, particularly if they're there for a long time, because ultimately that's where they're going to pick up a lot of learning naturally over the course of the day. So children are like sponges. They're just, it's a blank sheet basically. And so definitely it's one that you want to choose carefully in terms of where they spend their time when they're not in your company.
And you can probably get a feel just from speaking to the staff, like whether you gel with them, what their principles are, where they're coming from. You can pick up stuff in quite a short period of time as well about whether you feel comfortable. And I think with a lot of childcare stuff, you end up having to trust your instincts a lot of the time, and that often your instincts are right.
Right.
Thank you very much for the information that you have given us today. I'm sure it will help a long way for many of the people that are listening. At this moment, we're going to bring in Brother Craig, who is going to give us closing remarks. Thank you very much, Ree and Tamara.
Thank you, Ree.
Hey, Ree and Tamara, thank you for the presentation that's been given today and just the open discussion on your experience of raising children. You know, we're told in the Bible that children are a heritage of the Lord. They're special. We need to bear in mind that you're not just raising just a child. You're raising a son or a daughter of God for that heavenly kingdom. And I think some of the key points that you've mentioned, like kids from that baby stage to 3, and then from 3 to 7, they're like sponges. They're just taking in everything that they see, what they hear. And we've got to be so careful. Well, I do appreciate what you said, Tamara, with parents being open to the various ways that there are of raising a child, different ideas that are out there, taking on what's really helpful. We did, myself and Frida, we chose to do baby-led weaning, and the impact, it was just amazing to see how it really helped our son with various other options and developmental areas that he's going through right now. Well, Ria, I also understand that area, you know, with the child around, once they wake up in the morning, that's the day. It's like when I wake up sometimes to have devotion early, the moment I hear the pitter patter of those feet, I know, okay, Lord,
Yeah.
that time now, it's all about him. And like you said, Ree, with being off work, you said that you've been off work for a while and you've seen how much Tamara's been doing. We just want to say for the mothers out there, and also at times the fathers who are bearing the burden of raising the child, it's the most powerful work that can be done. And we just want to say that we appreciate you all. I know my wife's watching now, so I want to say that I appreciate her as well with everything that does get done. Today, while I was sitting down, and you know, me and my wife, we were talking, and then Israel comes running in the room, and he just reached out to his mom and he said he wanted to hold her, he wanted to hug her. And she said to me, there's a quote, and I'm going to read it to you. She said this to me while he was doing this. The quote says, "The most precious jewels you'll ever have around your neck are the arms of your children." And you know, while she said it and is hanging there and everything, it's just so true. We're raising children, jewels that are going to be made up in that great grand day when we see our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So I just want to say thank you for your presentation today. I'm sure it's encouraged everybody who's out there. And to the Young Married Couples Ministry, again, we have to say thank you for your ministry. Today we've got Only and Miriam, and we've also got Martin and Nyasha. We want to say thank you for the ministry that you're all doing. And I did say I've got a testimony that I'd like to share with you all. So I'm just gonna say, you know, over the past, I think, 4 weeks, you've done 2 sessions where you were dealing with issues, conflicts that can come up in marriage. And there was somebody who watched and they shared their testimony of where they were and how that program helped them. They said, God is so good. Amen. This seminar came at the perfect time for me and my family. My marriage was on the brink of collapse, and after attending this seminar, I was empowered to make positive changes. Attending this seminar enabled me to understand the power of language and how important it is to put the needs of your spouse above your own in trying circumstances. This is hopefully the start of a new chapter in my marriage, and it is thanks to the encouragement and guidance this seminar provided that I found to be strength to carry on.
Amen.
Say amen. You know, I mean, that's one testimony. And we've seen from comments that do come in, we don't know how many others God has helped through the ministry that you've provided. So I just want to say praise God to that too. Until the next time that you have your presentation, let's say a word of prayer, and we'll see you all soon. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we come before you, and we're ever so grateful for these opportunities. During this lockdown, this quarantine that we've all been going through, while the doors of the world seem to be opening up, at the same time, there's a fear that this trouble is still opening up. But Father, in every situation, we have seen that you have been faithful. In the midst of having to be at home without churches being opened on Sabbath, we've been able to talk about so many topics. But we don't know if we could have done this when the churches were open. And in the midst of this, we've seen marriages that have been rescued by you through ministries. And we've been encouraged by the words that have been provided every fortnight on this presentation that's been happening. As well as that, as all of the other programs that have been running at the same time, we're ever grateful, Lord. We pray that as the Sabbath is drawing to a close, that we'll have some precious moments with our families, with our children, as we approach the new week. Help us to hold on to you, and be with us, and continue to strengthen Ree and Tamara and the team that's here today. In Jesus' precious name we say, amen.
Amen.
God bless you all. I'd like to just remind you all that there's no program tomorrow. Our next session on NECyouth will be at 8 p.m. on Monday for our Real Talk session. So we look forward to seeing you then. God bless everyone.